Hi, everyone. Mike Malatesta here, and welcome back to the How Did Happen podcast. On this podcast, I dig in deep with every guest to explore the roots of their success, to discover not just how it happened, but why it matters. My mission is to find and share stories that inspire, activate, and maximize the greatness in you. On today's episode, I'm talking with Jodi Wellman, the creator of 4,000 Mondays, which is the number of Mondays the average person experiences in a lifetime. We talk about living a squander-free life, the beautiful gray journal that changed her thinking, making the career change from a corporate executive to a coach and keynote speaker, and the fulfillment that comes by being intentional with each and every Monday you have.
There's this concept that really I latched onto called temporal scarcity. And it is that when we tune in to the scarcity of our lives, the limiting factor of it being roughly 4,000 Mondays, like anything in life, like any kind of scarcity heuristic, when we know, wow, something is limited or rare, it tends to heighten the value or perceived value of it, right? So the same concept with our lives. And when you overlay that together, and I was able to sort of stitch all these different psychological constructs together, it swept me away.
Jodi is high energy, funny, and deadly serious about inspiring everyone to live a full life. I think you're going to love this conversation, so let's get to it. Hi, Jodi. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me here, Mike. I'm excited to chat with you.
I am excited to chat with you too. And we were chatting a little bit before we got started about some things that I think we'll get into now that we have started later. But first off, I gave you a little taste of what this podcast is about in the intro. And now I want to give you a little bit more information about Jodi so you can get as excited as I am about what's coming at you. So Jodi Wellman is a corporate executive who smartened up and became an executive coach, and then really smartened up and became a Stop Squandering Your Life keynote speaker and coach. Created a company called 4,000 Mondays, designed around the fact that if we're lucky, we get about 4,000 Mondays in our lives. That's probably something you've never thought about before. Jodi always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but she ignored the pull she felt since childhood and went after the paychecks and being responsible. That's a story that resonates. Finally, she gave herself permission and allowed herself to shake things up, to take a risk, to be okay with not following a linear path. Because let's face it, no life worth living is linear. In the last 2 years, Jodi has said yes to opportunities. She's learned, she's failed, she's brushed herself off, and she's kept on going, like you and I have. Sounds familiar. Her TEDx talk from 2022 is on this topic, and it's the 14th most watched TEDx talk from 2022. And I just checked today when I watched it, it's got 1.3 million, that's million plus views, as I said, as of today. And you will want to check that out right after you get done listening to this podcast. You can also go to Jodi's website and you can take the calculator exercise and find out your remaining Mondays. To do that, you go to 4,000 Mondays. That's the words all spelled out, .com/resources. And just as a point of reference, I took it today because I thought, well, why not? And I've got 1,306 Mondays left.
Woohoo!
Provided I don't, really do something stupid and live a halfway decent health life the rest of my life. So 1,306, that's 25 years. I'll do the math for you. And so I was kind of excited about that because I'm 57 now. So that takes me to like 92, which would be great. And longer would be even better than that. So thanks for putting that together and offering that. It's a fun way to drive home the story of 4,000 Mondays that we'll learn more about. So Jodi, I start every podcast with the same simple question, and that is, how did it happen for you?
Yeah, I love the way you asked that. And for me, I look at it like I got bit by the bug of death, which doesn't sound appealing, does it? Now that I say it out loud, I got bit by the bug of death early on, and I denied it, this idea of toying with our mortality as a motivator. And for me, the it happened question, for me was more when I gave myself permission to indulge it. And so often we have to do that, right? Write a permission slip that says, I get to. So I was in the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program at the University of Pennsylvania. And I didn't even want to talk about that while I was applying. So I just applied under the auspice of, I'm going to use this to be a better corporate leadership coach and leadership development expert. Yeah, except I still had this burgeoning inside of me to study this topic. And I did give myself permission to do my thesis on it, my capstone. And that cracked the doors wide open for me because I realized, I don't know, it's almost like I needed to see it was legit. There was empirical evidence to prove that this is actually a thing in psychological science. And I needed that behind me to say, well, if this has been documented before and it's been studied, I get to now do this. And I then changed my life around it. So I changed my career path essentially into starting 4,000 Mondays, which was a big deal, especially at the beginning of COVID. But one of my mottos these days is living a squander-free life or a regret-free life. And this would be an example to me of if I didn't take this move, if I didn't take this step, that I would deeply regret it on my deathbed. So for me, it was making it legit by studying it and realizing, oh, this is credible. I can talk about this. I'm allowed.
Yeah. What is it? What is the bug of death? Like what you say you're bit by it, but what the heck is it?
Right. And I hope that you get bit by it too by the time we're done talking. And so the notion is called memento mori, and it's an old Latin term, and it does translate to this notion of remember that we must die. And so many of you, I know your listeners are still thinking, scratching their heads like, well, that's morbid. What are we doing listening to this for? But wait, hold on. Because this idea of tuning into the fact that our time is limited, this is no surprise to anybody. We all know this, but we do a really bang up job of denying it and avoiding it. But if we do stop and get really intentional and focus on the fact that our time is limited, and quantify it the way that you did, the way that I do, the way that you have 1,306 Mondays left if you play your cards right. That is the thing that can help us to live with a greater sense of urgency and intention and meaning. Quite frankly, I call it like living like we mean it. We need a deadline to get on with things, don't we?
Yeah, well, without a target and a deadline, you sort of miss every time, right? I've heard people say that before.
Yeah. So we do take our lives for granted. We do slip into autopilot. It's just a natural part of being human. And we do these things for good reasons. I don't have judgment. I'm in autopilot daily. I'm just trying to consistently get out of it. And that's the spirit of this, is to say, whoa, now that I'm really cognizant that my time is limited, how do I want to make it special? How do I want to make the most of it? Because we may not get the 1,306, or in my case, 1,880. We may not get that. We might get more. Let's be optimistic here. But
sure.
What do we want to fit in? Because there's a ton of stuff. I mean, man, we want to fit a ton of stuff in, don't we?
So time frame wise, this work that you did at University of Pennsylvania, where were you in the arc of your journey when that happened?
Yeah. So this was 2019 to 2020. Okay. And I was full tilt working with a fabulous partner running a leadership development firm and working with great clients and doing a lot of great work with teams and individuals. And it was a great time. I had made a switch from my corporate career, but now it's 10 years ago. And so at that point, things were humming along really wonderfully. But I'd always had this notion behind me of this idea of memento mori. And I just didn't have the courage to find a way to bring it up and really build it into my day-to-day. At the time, I had this limiting belief that, well, who wants to hear about this? And even though I position it in a way that I think is super riveting and I try not to make it intimidating, I scared myself out of it. And also, really, it was just because I was chicken. I was afraid of rejection and failure, if I'm being honest. And so, yeah, at that time, it was the eye-opening thing for me of, I am now so called by this that I can't not do it. Like it was a true gripping. And that caused me to shift my direction. And I still do some leadership development work for fabulous clients that I have from the past. But my work now is in helping to get up and encourage groups to get on with the business of living.
Well, you're not the only one on this Zoom call who can admit to being scared about doing things that maybe are outside, well, not only outside the comfort zone, but kind of like, will anybody care about this the way I care about it or what I'm doing?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Hey, I see you. We see each other eye to eye. I get you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you go into this, what was it about the education or the coursework or whatever that kind of, I guess, narrowed you in on this sort of interesting little death bug niche?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, other than it being, so I'll just tell you a story about it that now just struck me. A friend of mine, a former employee turned friend, Tanis is her name. She gave me this beautiful gray journal that I inadvertently ended up using as my space to hold all these special notes and quotes around death and little musings and clippings. And I would cut stuff out and put it in, and I would write stuff out. And this was my journal that held my very special stuff. And in the spirit of also being intimidated by the dream you have, because it holds so much potential, that holds so much fear about what if it doesn't take off.
Yeah.
I had this gray journal that I would keep off to the side, and I would look at it sometimes almost with scorn, because that's the thing I want to do, but I don't know how to do it yet. And that created a lot of feelings around it. So I had this really beautiful gray journal, but man, it had a lot of feelings. And for me, the indulgence of studying it created this opening. So not only was the gray journal then fair game and open, it was that I was knee deep in 300-page thesis of all of this that allowed me to swim in the waters, get intoxicated, whatever metaphor works for you. And it created a sense of validity, and it got me even more excited, I think, is really it. So I look at this as like stoking the fires of passion, really. There are things that we might be interested in, but they do scare us, but we need to go and I think like light that flame, see how bright it can burn. And for me, it was research. And there's this concept that really I latched onto called temporal scarcity. And it is that when we tune in to the scarcity of our lives, the limiting factor of it being roughly 4,000 Mondays, like anything in life, like any kind of scarcity heuristic, when we know, wow, something is limited or rare, it tends to heighten the value or perceived value of it, right? So the same concept with our lives. And when you overlay that together, and I was able to sort of stitch all these different psychological constructs together, it swept me away. So I do think that it was part legit science. It was also part passion. And it made that scary gray journal feel like, oh, that's just going to become my business and then therefore my life. Because, we happily can let work and life meld into one if it's the right fit. So yeah, for me, it was about probably passion and legitimacy together.
And from what I read, Jodi, some of this, or maybe all of this, precipitated or was influenced by your mom.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
You're right. Yeah. So she passed away in her late 50s of a heart attack. She had a pacemaker put in, and then that only lasted a few weeks. And the clincher, I would say, was less about losing her. The clincher, as far as the impetus to make a move in this direction for me, was more about my belief that she had a lot of regrets when she died. And she was a real dreamer, but not so much a doer. She had, as I was cleaning up her place, drawers and cabinets and notions and ideas of businesses that she wanted to start. And she'd share them with me over the years. And I was always gung-ho. Yeah, that sounds great. But I knew that it wouldn't get lift off because she didn't have a lot of the resources. She didn't have a lot of money, but a lot of it was the confidence and the courage. So, I've already given you enough cues and clues about my own fear about my great book and all these things. And so to know that while I was in this space of part mourning, but part cleaning up her place and realizing, oh my goodness, this is a graveyard of hopes and dreams. I'm sorry, that sounds dramatic, but I saw myself in it. And I saw that I do not want to get to the end prematurely or not and have what I call just a book of coulda, shoulda, wouldas. And I think at that time I was in a job that was starting to feel itchy, the feelings of, I don't know if I want to be doing this for long, but I don't know what to do. So you feel stuck. But for me, it was a wake up call for me of, oh, honey bunny, you're going to want to get on with it.
So that's what you said there just really interested me, because you said your mom was a dreamer, not a doer. And it feels like one of the things that we do as parents and as a community is we encourage people to dream big, follow your dreams, all of that kind of thing. And without an activation mechanism inside of us, a doing mechanism inside of us, you don't really, you can dream all you want, but you won't really achieve your dreams because you need that activation doing, right?
The execution button to do it. And you're flagging for me something that I remember in studying positive psychology, blew me away, because you're right. The encouragement is dream big. And I mean, I'll probably even be accused of saying that again after this conversation. I like the notion of it. Like, let's not sell ourselves short.
Yeah.
There are various ways to say it and mean it. And yet, this is the thing I found just mind-blowing that happens to us deep within the little portals of our brain. It's this notion called free fantasy, where we have a dream and we start to think a little bit about it, and we indulge in those little fun feelings about, oh, this is how it's going to go and this is how it's going to feel. And what's happening psychologically is we are experiencing emotions that feel good in that moment. And it actually feels just good enough for many of us that little free form fantasy that we had in that moment is adequate enough for us to then sit back and change the channel on the TV, or go back and scroll through social media, or go do nothing. And we don't take action because it's just sort of satisfying enough to give us that little bit of a feel good. And so in many ways, I don't want to be the one ever quoting, the power of positive thinking is a dangerous thing, but I will just say it. We need to be very cognizant that sometimes indulging in that amazing feeling of what it'll be like to launch that business, or what that new program is going to do, or all the things that we long to do, if we're not stopping and then also imagining, quite frankly, the pitfalls and obstacles that might show up, and then what would the first step be, and then what would the second step be, and then what would the second step be if the second step didn't work, we need to do that just as much as we do the dream. And so I do issue that sort of cautionary warning of, we can trick ourselves into dreaming and then not doing, maybe for the rest of our lives. And that sounds like a shame.
Yeah. And you framed that up really well, because as you were saying it, it reminded me of The Secret, where if you put thoughts out into the universe and just wait, they'll, I'm simplifying the process and probably don't have it 100% right. But that whole notion of, if you think good thoughts and you think, put your dreams and aspirations out into the world, I'm not even sure how you do that, but then you can just, they'll come and find you. And that hasn't been my experience. They don't come and find me. They are searched out by me. I search them out because I know I have some idea about what I want, and you go searching for that.
I love that. Yeah. There's more intention behind it. And I think that part of what it looks like is taking the step to actually have a wish. And there's even a construct in psychology where some people are not even daring enough to get to the point where they have a wish and a want and a dream or a goal, however you want to put it. And let's presume, though, that we got there. Hey, here's the thing I want. It sounds like you are far more action oriented. And I think that's the difference between those of us that will let some things languish, right? Is I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it even if I am afraid. I'm going to do it anyway. We wait for confidence to show up, and that ain't never coming. Like, we got to do the thing, and then maybe confidence gets built from that, rather than waiting for it to show up on a platter. Yeah.
You've, one of my mentors, Dan Sullivan, says that you have to have courage before you have any chance of confidence, because courage gets you started on something you don't have any confidence about. And then ultimately, if you're successful, having had the courage will create the capability that then brings confidence. Comes way later down the road. It doesn't, because if you wait for the confidence, it ain't coming.
Right. Right. We're not going to press the go button on anything.
Yeah. Right. So the way you ended your TED Talk was with this question: how can death bring you back to life? And again, I'm reminding everyone to watch Jodi's TED Talk. But what does that mean? Because you ended with that, and I thought to myself, how can death bring you back to life?
Yeah.
So how do you see that? And what do you want us to do with that sentence?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I can get very specific. So this is it. If we take the way most of us can identify, whether we're busy, successful professionals, or we're just living life and life takes over, we can end up in kind of what I think of as this sort of slumbering existence, right? It could be that we are in the zombie zone where we're just kind of going through the motions and time's passing us by. Or it could be that maybe we are plugged in on a lot of days, but we do have ideas of things we want to do. Maybe it's on a proverbial bucket list and we think, oh, I'm going to get to do that later. Well, the premise here, my belief, the whole foundation of 4,000 Mondays is if we keep going through these motions and taking our time and lives for granted, we could all of a sudden get to the end and experience that phenomenon that a lot of people feel, which is that sense of life left unlived. And that's the part that grips me, right? That's the part that I feel like that's the potentially dying with regrets in the hopper of things that you wanted to do but didn't because you just didn't take it seriously. This ticking time bomb of the lives we're living, to get dramatic. Whereas the idea of death can bring us back to life literally in a few ways. So one is the one you've already hinted on, which is counting our Mondays. And yes, there's a calculator on my website if you don't like math. But having that sense of temporal scarcity of saying, oh, right, this number of course is diminishing. And here's the number. How am I going to fit in all these things I long to do? I'm just going to get on with it. I'm going to book that trip to Prague, or I am going to register for that online program I've been thinking about, or whatever the thing might be for you. So that sense of urgency that comes from the dwindling time frame can be a motivator for many of us. Another way to do it is this idea of tapping into our regrets. And I affectionately call them pregrets, because these are regrets in the making that are based in this idea about stuff that maybe we didn't do. And in the research around regrets, there are regrets of commission and regrets of omission, kind of like sins. And we can tend to rationalize the regrets of commission, like you did a dumb thing. You bullied so-and-so in the schoolyard, or you got fired from that job, or you did XYZ. We're not talking about your things you did wrong. That's water under the bridge. We're talking about the regrets of omission, meaning the paths not taken. And the deathbed regrets exercise, we've all heard of it. We've all kind of toyed with it, but I want us to get serious with it and say, if I was to go tonight, what would be the list of things? Tiny things, seemingly insignificant things, big things, all the things in between that I might be kicking myself and think, man, I just didn't get around to it because I kind of just thought I had forever, or I knew I was I'm gonna die at some point, but I just didn't take it seriously.
Right.
And so, can I get nosy for a minute and just see, is there anything that would be on your list, even if it's seemingly trivial?
The regrets or
like something that you would think if you were to go tonight, which you were not, that, oh man, I just wished I never got around to doing that thing I kind of wanted to do.
Yes. So there would be a lot of things on that list. I don't know. And I wanted to ask you this after. I don't know if I would frame them as regrets, but there are certainly relationships that I would like to improve between now and whenever that time, 1,306 Mondays from now. There are relationships that there are achievements that I would like to see myself and people around me achieve, make real before then. So I mean, if I start thinking about this, there would be a ton of stuff, right?
Well, that's the exercise. And thank you for your real-time processing is helpful, because once we kind of get started, and you are right, they're not regrets now, because this is the beauty of it, is that you're fully functioning and living. And the exercise is, if you were 5 minutes away from expiring, then it would be a regret, right? Because it'd be like, I didn't do it. I didn't savor the time I had and mend that relationship or improve that relationship or achieve that thing, that goal I set for myself. I could have done it, but I just let time sort of float by, and I floated down the lazy river of life in a way, which I'm not calling you lazy river floater, but this is what we do. And so the exercise is designed to sit and go,
lazy river floater.
You lazy river, are you?
You called me normal before, but now you're really,
take it back.
Now you're really cutting me deep now. Lazy river floater. Wow.
No, I think with the regrets in the making that you've identified, it makes you exceedingly normal still. And this is our chance. This is the part that I get so giddy about is, oh, but good. Because now, of course, in the exercise, we're like, well, we're not on our deathbeds. And so we actually have a chance today to get going on those things that we would have kicked ourselves for if had we not. So it offers up a chance to take some action in an otherwise I'll do it later mentality. And that's powerful. One more way to answer your question about how death can bring us back to life. So we've got the Counter Mondays, we've got the identify your regrets. Another one is around how people who have come close to death, like some people call them death gazers, or they've had a brush, they've had maybe a diagnosis that was super crappy health-wise, or, we all know people who've come close in like a motorcycle accident or something.
Sure. They
are so typically starkly aware of the sanctity of the life that they almost lost. So I'm going to be super, in some ways I'm envious. I study this stuff for a living. I talk about this stuff for a living. And unless you're there on the precipice, it's just not as visceral. But what I'm clamoring for every darn day is to get just a fraction of that insight that they've experienced. Mm-hmm. Those very lucky people, because they're lucky they've had the experience, but they're also lucky that they didn't fall over the edge into death. And that because they typically have this newfound reorganization of the priorities in thetheir life. They shed all those other notions of things typically that, they once sort of felt were culturally, asserted norms, like you're supposed to do this or you're supposed, they don't care as much anymore. They don't sweat the small stuff. They're laser focused on more of the stuff that how they want to spend their time. That's what I want us all to have. And so that's the goal is, and it's a bit of a stretch to do the thought exercise, but it can be helpful for some people is to think about something that you want to do or in the midst of something that's troubling for you. And to imagine, hey, if I just got released from the hospital this morning from a coma that I was in for 3 weeks and I almost died and I made it, would this problem actually be a problem right now? Or if I am home from the hospital and my neck is kind of kinked, but it'll get better. Do I want to book that ticket to Prague? Because now I see how precious this time is. I think the answer is yes. And that's the spirit of what I want us to grab.
So you've mentioned psychology a number of times, and now you've got me thinking. So the examples you just gave about someone who sort of has a near-death experience and all of a sudden realizes how valuable life is, right? Realizes how valuable their relationships are. Yeah. So here's the psychology I want you to break down. Why does it take something like that? And for that's one part. The other part is for the people who haven't done that or haven't had that epiphany or whatever you want to call it. Why are we so afraid, generally speaking, of thinking about something like when you're going to die and the time between now and then? And in all kinds of ways, you don't plan for it. You don't, you like wills and estates and stuff. People just put it off. Their health they put off because they think I feel good today. I'll feel good. We're just always. It seems to me we're always kind of putting stuff off and getting people to focus on this. Is the third part of the question. I'm sorry for such a long question, but getting people to focus on the number of Mondays that they have left feels to me like it could be overwhelming for people who fall in the camp of the other two things that I put in front of that. So what can you make of that?
Yes. Great points. Keep me on track. I'll start with the first one, and then maybe you might need a reminder, but I think I'm going to try to get it.
Yeah, that's okay. I could forget too. So
we'll just end up talking about
we'll go somewhere else if I totally forget. Don't worry.
Okay. No, I think I've got it. It's tenuous, but I've got this. So the first one about like, why is it that we essentially do end up kind of taking things for granted? There's a fascinating and important adaptation we make in our lives. And we deal with just a ton of pieces of information every day, and it's overload, and we need to simplify things. And so admittedly, it's actually quite helpful that we are not always super mindful of everything at every moment, or we would go berserk. And there's this phenomenon called the hedonic treadmill, or what's called hedonic adaptation, and it's that idea that we will naturally just get used to all the good things that we do seek out and create for ourselves, all the goals that, say, for example, would be on your pre-gret list. So you said achievements you want for yourself and for others and so on. And let's say you reach some of those achievements and it feels really good. And then it's going to wane because that's what it does. And so we end up adjusting. Now, the good news is we also adjust to the crappy stuff in life, but we adjust to the good. And that we end up with a little bit of a blanding. It's a little bit of a leveling, a smoothing over in accounting. It's sort of like we just kind of end up with more of a beige kind of potential existence unless we're actively trying to create something new to achieve, create a way to widen our lives with more fun and vitality, or create a way to deepen our lives with more meaning. And so the tendency is just very natural for us to adapt to any of the really fabulous things that are going on around us. So we come by that honestly. And then I guess part two is you were asking about our tendency to want to push it off. Like we don't want to think about death, like our denial tendency. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. We also come by that honestly. It is it is the greatest fear, even more so than public speaking, although some would beg to differ. Some would rather die than public speak, but we're not generally interested in it. And it's a Western phenomenon more than most, right? So we've made death hidden from the, day-to-day experience. We don't want to talk about it, although we will be willing to write about it in the news, and it's in most of the movies we watch. So we're voyeuristic about it, but we're very uncomfortable. And so that's why when many of us, it's become socially awkward to talk, for example, to your kids about your will, or to your spouse about it, or to your parents about what did they want for their dying wishes. And so it's seen as uncouth. And because we don't talk about it, it makes actually the problem worse, where we just want to plug our ears and not think or talk about it. And that there's a cost that we pay for that. We pay dearly. A lot of psychologists will say that by not thinking and talking about it, not just because it means that what are our wishes at the end? I'm, to be honest, less concerned about that than I am in the idea that we postpone our existence because we are unwilling to think and talk and even, go on with it. We go on with it, the conversation, not life. We will then defer the hopes and dreams we have for ourselves. So you see this with people, I'm sure. I see this all the time with people I work with. The idea that I'm going to get around to doing XYZ later, or when I retire, I'm going to do all these things, or that bucket list, it's brimmingly full of good intentions. Well, just like the frickin' road to hell is paved with good intentions. I always say, like, the road to the grave is paved with a bucket list that is so full because we all thought we could do it later, because we're not thinking and talking about death because it's just awkward to do so. Sure. And we've just adapted, and we are not snapping to attention and counting our Mondays. And so this is the game here. It's these are the cold, hard facts of reality of just being alive, is that we're not going to be alive necessarily for that long or forever. And so let's just take it a little, let's just use that to our advantage, use that uncomfortable feeling to our advantage to say, I don't need to dwell in it. I don't need to get morbid and go all into detail. And for some exercises, of course, I get people to write obituaries and whatever, but you don't need to languish in the land of the Grim Reaper for long, but just use enough of a dose of it to say, okay, I'm going to get on with that thing. I'm going to call my sister, or I'm going to book that trip, or fine, I'm going to go register for that piano class, or, and there are a million fill in the blanks.
That struck me when you used the term voyeuristic about other people's death, because, there's a whole section in the newspapers and online, of obituaries, and people make a practice, especially I think the older you get, you start making a practice of reading obituaries of other people, right? Because you're like, I don't know exactly why, but
there's actually a psychology notion around it now.
Oh, what is it?
Well, some of us, it's called practicing death is one of the ways that it can be looked at, but it's this little notion of like just hinting with it, trying it on for size, kind of being like, when you're like kicking the tires of a car, you might be like, it's just a little, it's like, these are the little ventures in that we're willing to look at. Yeah.
It seems to me like what you're talking about makes perfect sense, because at least in my life, I found, and you tell me if this is true for you, but whatever I pay attention to or have intention about almost always improves. It's just like the nature of the way things go. If you pay attention to something, or if you have an intention about something, it gets closer to what you want it to be. It improves. It gets closer to what you want it to be. Does that resonate with you? Or
what you just described is one of the summaries, in all honesty, of the science of positive psychology, which is the scientific study of well-being and what makes life worth living. And there's an old adage, I think it's William James was the philosopher, and I'm going to bastardize the quote, but you basically said it. It's like what you pay attention to is what flourishes. So that's why, if you're going to have a thought in your head, might as well make it more of an optimistic one than a pessimistic one.
Right.
Now, some might say, well, whoa, pot calling the kettle black over there. You're talking about death, but wait, it's in service of, right? It's in service of living wide and living deep, because we may not let's live long. And even if we do live long, we still want it to be wide and deep, and we still want to, suck the marrow out of the bone, so to speak.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you about what we choose to pay attention to, and that I'm sold that it can work to our advantage. I get to see it and experience it firsthand. I need to do it for myself daily.
I'm glad you're talking about it, and in a funnish way, with how many Mondays you have left. When I joined a program back in 2003 or 4. And it was an entrepreneurial coaching program. And one of the first exercises we did was called the lifetime extender. And they basically asked you what year you thought, or what age you thought you were going to die at. And that's a weird question to ask somebody, right? That you've never met before. Like, what age do you think you're going to die? And you write down an age, and then they talk you through, they basically coach you up a little bit. And they say, look, if the day before you thought you were going to die, you were healthy, happy, had lots of friends, had the money you needed to do what you needed to, wanted to do, do the Prague thing, whatever. If you were all of those things the day before you thought you were going to die, how much longer would you live? And so you come back with a higher number. I mean, it's kind of a trick, and it's kind of an easy trick, but it makes so much sense. It's sort of like that's about the way you think you are going to feel when you are at a certain age, when you think you're going to die. And that's all based off of, what you've seen already in your life, like your parents, for your mom or whatever. And because I think if you think about the Mondays in a similar fashion, you have on your thing, what you have low, middle, high, I think on the thing as far as your health, how you're feeling at that, or how you take care of yourself or whatever. And it makes a big difference. I think you can actually take the number of Mondays you have left, or think you have left, and then put yourself in that very same question and be like, oh, I got 10 years of Mondays,
right?
Left. That's another 520 Mondays, or whatever the math is.
Yes.
That, right.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I get, I get kind of nerdy with numbers, and there's a thing that I actually think is on my website you can download for free. It's like 43 ways to live longer. And some of it's goofy science, but most of it's legit. And there are just really neat studies about, for example, having a purpose in life. Right. You're, 2.5 times likelier not to die in a 10-year period. And that's not a quantifiable number of years, but there are many little silly examples I give around if you do X, Y, Z. And a lot of it has to do with, obviously, it's health, nutrition, but a lot of it is mindset, different activities. It all kind of comes back in one way or another around the well-being and the good life, positive psychology. The way you can extend your life is potentially dramatic, and the presumption is that if we're extending it by doing these good things that are good for us, that it's also that they're enjoyable years. Because I don't know if anybody's really interested in living longer if we're miserable or unhealthy. So it's exciting. There's huge potential.
Yeah. And I think you're right. That's when you ask them that question, how many Mondays, whatever, they think about the worst case, like, oh, my aunt is 85, but man, she's in a home and she's in a wheelchair and she can't get around. I don't want to live like that. Right. So you go, I don't want to live to 85, because that's what 85 is, for example. You talk yourself into, right?
Right.
Amazing what you can talk yourself into or out of, I guess.
Oh yeah. Well, there's also this notion that I am in knee-deep research with right now that I am delighted by. And it's the idea about, again, back to these choices and trade-offs. So this idea of think about the life that you are living, and you have options. So would you rather live, for example, a 6 out of 10 life, but get to 90? Or would you rather an 8 out of 10 kind of life, but only live to 70? What would you rather?
Well, I'm going to ask you a clarifying question, because I don't know what 6 and 8 actually mean in that. So I'm just going to presume that 6 means I can't do everything that I want to do, and 8 means that I can reasonably.
Life satisfaction. Like your degree to which you're satisfied with your life.
Yeah. And I'm also going to assume that 6 means boring and 8 means excited. And so for those I sound like a game show. For those reasons, I'm going to choose 70 and 8.
Got you. Yeah. I don't think there's a right or wrong. And there's obviously like I have a whole chart with all the ages, because it goes as high as a 10 out of 10 life that you're like, my life is amazing. It could not get better, but you die at 50. That's one of the options. Then of course it goes all the way down, all the way to living in a very different way. So research shows that most people value a happy ending. We like happy endings. And so the idea, I mean, it's easier to say it when it's far out, right? Sure, I'll die early if I'm happier in the moment. As you get closer to that later age, you might think differently. But anyway, I'm doing more research around it. I'll let you know how it goes.
Okay. Well, I think the other thing to that would be kind of interesting there is whether you're going to die or not. Is if it just happens and you don't know it, you can't really experience a pre-grat or anything else. So if you were an 8 at 70 and you just got hit by a bus or something, that's a pretty good life.
Yeah.
But if it were me looking back, if I had something to say, I'd say, yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to get into the change from corporate to coaching, the initial change from corporate to coaching, because I want to know how you were feeling. You mentioned it a little bit, but I'd like to get a little more granular on it, Jodi, because so many people that are listening are may very well be in that, I've been doing this for a long time. Yeah, it's been good to me. Yeah, there's they're in a gravitational force that's keeping them where they are, yet they aspire. And maybe it's just like the aspire before Netflix goes on, but they aspire to do some other thing that's going to light them up more, and they just don't get there.
Yep. I am familiar personally, and then familiar from countless clients in a similar situation. And so I have a lot of strong thoughts and feelings on this. And I want to acknowledge the feelings that are of stuckness, right? So there is, you used the word comfort zone earlier, and I think it's really appropriate, because there is a comfort associated with, let's say it's the nuts and bolts, right? I like the money, or at least it's a reliable paycheck. I like the fact that maybe, if we're talking about maybe moving into doing your own thing, it may or may not mean the end of benefits. I like my title. This is my ego associated with this now. It's my identity, that this is what I've been known for. There's the pride of, I have mastery over this thing that I've become pretty darn good at, if I do say so myself, all these years. And then there's the fear of the unknown, the fear of failure, rejection, and emotional upheaval, which many of us, we don't want to make changes because we're just not sure how we're going to handle it.
Yeah. And I could suck too. There's that whole thing. Like man, if I tried this, I could suck. Yeah. And I'm actually going to suck until I get good. So anyway.
Yeah, that's part of the game. Yeah. You're right. That is an absolute part of the sign up. And that's where there's got to be a belief that after trudging through that is one of the very things that makes you stronger and feeling more fulfilled and happier. So despite all the reasons why we will talk ourselves into staying in a situation that's okay, those to me are the red flags, by the way. So I see it now clearly. I see it in others that I work with, where it's any semblance of that, well, it's okay, or the settling, or the tolerating, or the justifying why the real thing you long to do just isn't right. I'll just do this for all of that. To me is antenna up, want to reach through Zoom and grab you by the throat and shake you. Well, probably shoulders. I don't want to choke you. I still want you to live prosperly. I want the belief and the confidence that there is life on the other side. There is so much more range and joy, and not without some upheaval and hardship. So for example, with me 10 years ago, making a change, I did leave a very secure income to start my own business that I knew, thankfully, expectations were managed for me in advance, that the first 2 years were going to be a build. And not everybody has the ability to do that, I recognize, but these are the trade-offs we make, right? Mm-hmm. I spoke earlier today with a woman who just left her long-term secure corporate situation to start something as well. And these are part of what make us stronger, is because we are able to trudge through and figure out, learn the lessons, figure out what works, what doesn't. And one of the things I noticed is, regardless of whether we win or lose or fail, or how long we fail until we win, or however the story plays out, what is undeniable and valuable is the pride and that sense of satisfaction that comes from, I gave it a go.
Right.
And that is worth more than almost anything, I do believe. And I say this not from my own sake, but from the people I know, clients, and so on, where it's, I stood up for myself. I gave my life a fighting chance for joy and for meaning. And I set an example for my kids even. Like, here's the thing, is a lot of people that have families are making a choice that might be short-sighted, right? I need to stay secure for my kids. Yes. And what about demonstrating for your kids that it's worth it to put in a lot of, blood, sweat, and tears to go and maybe take a risk, but it's an educated risk. You're not just necessarily jumping out to join some multi-level marketing campaign or something. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I don't know, but you're taking a risk. And then, is that worth it for the shot? That's something that has maybe more upside. And even if it doesn't have more upside, that gives you more well-being. Is that not worth it?
Right. I recently did a podcast with a guy named Brad Zapecki, and I had Brad on the podcast before, and he was running a managed IT type business. It was big. It was successful. It got all the press for best places to work, all that stuff. He left that and started his own business, and it didn't go well. Mm-hmm. And when we talked, he was in the process of winding it down. And it was interesting that he wanted to talk to me about this part of it, because it was just like what we were talking about. You're very successful, your mastery, like you said, and the other things that come with it, the pay, the benefits, all that stuff. And he just felt like he had to take the risk. And he was talking about, how much he was concerned about his kids seeing him work through this, and ultimately succeed, which he didn't succeed the way that he imagined it would be. But as we were having the conversation, he was like, you know what, I did succeed because they saw this part of me. They saw the chance, they saw the struggle, they saw the getting back on your feet, they saw all these things. And he said, I think that'll really benefit them as they move forward, and make the choices in their life. So it was really interesting. It was really, a lot of people aren't willing to have that kind of conversation. So I was very happy that he was willing to have that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that you went there too, because think about your listeners, that now it's when we normalize and celebrate that not everything is a slam dunk. We only really hear about the success stories, and that's just a bunch of baloney. We know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. And we also hear about success stories as if they started and the next year it was like, oh my God, I just crushed it. That's,
right.
Yeah, not often. Not often. So Jodi, the 4,000 Mondays, when you work with someone, how do you start with them, and how do you get them focused on, not squandering any Mondays any longer? How do you get them on that track?
Yeah. Most of the work I do now, I get to do in groups or teams. So it's in either workshops or retreats, groups with people. Yeah. And there's a fun thing that happens. So whether, there are a few exercises that I've found interesting, is that a couple things. One is based on the notion of, I think, diagnosing the dead zones is a very important first start. And it's that old notion about you can't manage what you can't measure. So I think everybody does need to start and identify, and I have an assessment that helps people to figure this out. Like, where have things flatlined in my life? Because sometimes we lump everything together, right? We conflate, like, my life is a 7 or my life is a 5.3 or whatever. But okay, but what if we did just get a little more granular and said, wait a minute, it's actually my love life that's lacking, or it's my friendships, or it's my hobbies. I don't have any anymore. Really diagnosing where in life are you feeling like things are lacking? Because now we've got a little bit of a fighting chance to figure some stuff out. So I think that diagnosing is key. The next thing, which is, it's amusing and it's also sad, is that as adults, we've often lost touch with the things that make us feel really alive and the things that make us just quite simply happy. So I ask a lot of people in groups, or whether it was one-on-one, make a list of 30 things that you really enjoy doing. And they can't all be things like, oh, I love it going on cruises in the Mediterranean. Okay, well, no, but like, don't we all? But like, pick something that's kind of doable in your life, like within the next month or so. And sometimes we lose sight of, sometimes it's the simple things. Because I really need to manage the message of what I profess. Because in this whole thing about, essentially it's carpe diem, right? Seize the day before we all croak. But that doesn't mean live large and massive and like, whoa, I mean, we got mortgages to pay and we've got to breathe. And some of us are introverts. Like, what if we just held on a minute? What does it mean to live fully before we die? It's relative for each person. And so for many people, that exercise and I encourage this for everybody, sit down and write out 30 things that do make you happy, most of which do have to be accessible to you. Don't be afraid of the mundane. It's little things like, one woman's like, I just love tending to my tomatoes on my break between Zoom meetings at work. It just brings me so much joy, right? Or, some people love, one gentleman's like, I love kneading the bread for my Friday night dinner that I make. And so do more of it, right? But we need a bit of a list of options so that we can then stop and say, well, do more of those things in your life. Or when was the last time you did that thing that you love? A lot of us have dormant interests or hobbies or passions that we think, oh man, like I used to love the trombone. And well, when was the last time you played? Oh, well, it's been years. That's like low-hanging fruit, right?
Yeah.
So getting back in tune with the things that once lit you up, or that you do enjoy, or you would enjoy, and starting to zero in on, well, when might those things fit into your very busy life? I'm not naive. Like I know we don't count our Mondays and then all of a sudden the clouds part and we've got all this time in the world to go live the life of your dreams. Well, I know that tires will still need changing and you're going to need to, do the laundry. But what about fitting in some of the things that might give you more joy in between those things? What about being conscious and saying, have you planned your time off for the next year? So you have something to look forward to. When's your next vacation? When's your vacation after that? Even if it's a staycation, I don't care about your budget, but what are you doing? Where so a lot of it is about diagnosing where things are flat and then zeroing in on those areas and refilling that bucket with things that are happiness and joy and meaning inducing to fill some of that void.
I'm as you were talking about making the list, I was thinking to myself, well, as I'm making that list, I'm also thinking about the things that that are on my list now that I may not want on my list.
Yeah. Do you have an example or even conceptually?
Well, yeah, like a lot of people, I think it seems like the reason that they don't focus on maximizing every Monday, let's say, is because they're so tied up in the things they air quotes have to do. And it seems to me like certainly there are things in everyone's life that you have to do, but there are a lot of things that we have a tendency to accept as have-tos that really aren't have-tos, they're choices.
Yeah.
But if you accept them as have-tos, and then they become part of who the things that get in the way of you doing the things you want to do, then it's just like an excuse generator.
It is. Yes. You just made me think about, the Franklin Covey quadrants for time management. There's the 4 quadrants, and one is like a matter of matter of importance and urgency.
Important, not urgent. And yeah.
And we all strive to be in that Q2, which is, it is important, but not urgent. And it's all the stuff that we should be doing, like prioritizing and strategizing and really getting deep in relationships and the things that matter. But it all gets sloughed aside because we got to go and attend the 3:30 Zoom meeting and we got to go listen to someone else's emergency. And, we have to go check Facebook and stupid stuff, right?
Yeah.
But life, the best part of life that I call the astonishingly alive zone, does require a little bit of TLC. It does require us to get intentional with it. And that is the very thing that we will miss if we don't stop and say, what do I want to do? And when will I do it? And you simply need to just put a little stake in the ground in your calendar and say, okay, fine, this Saturday, we're going to Joshua Tree to do that hike that we've been talking about for 6 months, and we're going to do it. And you know what you do? You go and do it. And then you do the laundry after.
Yeah.
That you would have done had you not gone, because the time would have filled. You know this, but you need to plan for it in a very intentional way, I think is what it comes down to.
Yeah. You need to give yourself permission to be selfish about the things that light you up. And
yes,
if you can be a little selfish about those things, you can start to whittle away all the things that are, getting in the way of you actually living the life you want to live.
100%. Do you want to get to the end and feel really proud that you did a whole lot of laundry on time? Or do you want to get to the end and feel like you fit in some things that actually made your list that you knew were going to give you a shot at more joy? I think we all know what we would choose, unless laundry gives you joy, which that's a different
some people it does, and they should be doing more of it.
Exactly. You can do mine.
Yes. Well, Jodi, this has been such a fun conversation. I thank you so much for coming on. I do want to ask you before we go, is there anything that I didn't ask you, should have asked you, that you want to leave with the audience before we go?
Oh, thanks for asking that. Your questions are so good and thorough that I believe we covered a lot of ground. It would probably just be me putting in a last minute plug to befriend the Grim Reaper, because he is the very thing we want nothing to do with, but that holds the most potential to live these astonishing lives before we do, in fact, bite the biscuit. That's a great way to end. Thank you, Jodi. And for everyone listening, take this to heart. Take the Mondays to heart. Take the 4,000 Mondays or the 1,300 Mondays or the 1,800 Mondays or however many Mondays you have left. Take this to heart. And like I always leave you with, maximize the greatness in you today and every day. And I want you to create a future that is your property and something that you are very, very proud to own. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the show. And before you go, I just have 3 requests for you. 1, if you like what I'm doing, please consider subscribing or following the podcast on whatever podcast platform you prefer. If you're really into it, leave me a review, write something nice about me, give me 5 stars or whatever you feel is most appropriate. Number 2, I've got a book. It's called Ownership: How Getting Selfish Got Me Unstuck. It's an Amazon bestseller. And I'd love for you to read it or listen to it on Audible or wherever else, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. You can get it everywhere. If you're looking for inspiration that will help you unlock your greatness and potential, order or download it today so that you can have your very own copy. And if you get it, please let me know what you think. Number 3, my newsletter. I do a newsletter every Thursday, and I talk about things that are interesting to me, or I give more information about the podcast and the podcast guests that I've had and the experiences that I've had with them. You can sign up for the podcast today at my website, which is my name, MikeMalatesta.com. You do that right now, put in your email address, and you'll get the very next issue. The newsletter is short, thoughtful, and designed to inspire, activate, and maximize the greatness in you.